Y'all stand and sing with us. Jesus said it is expedient for me to go away, but I'll send you another comforter to guide you from day to day. So I tarry at Jerusalem for power from on high. It's Spirit that they receive within my heart abide. I am free, Holy Spirit, that dwelling deep within. And sometimes you feel so gentle, and sometimes you might question me. But that's the Spirit that brings Jesus up from death and the grave. Redemption waits. Yes, somebody up and take me home someday. Oh, they laid him in an empty tomb and rolled his soul out below. Faithful soldiers answered dying, they thought they would live alone. On the third day, stars rolled away, and he came forth from the grave. That's the Spirit that brings Jesus that will take me home someday. I can feel His Holy Spirit dwelling deep within. And sometimes He is so gentle, and sometimes I might question Him. But that's His Spirit that brings Jesus up from death and the grave. Redemption waits. Let somebody up and take me home someday. Any prayer requests? So, chapter 1 in the book of Ezra. It says, Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, The Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver, with gold, with goods, and with beasts, beside the freewill offering of the house of God that is in Jerusalem. Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, the priests and the Levites, with all them whose spirit God had raised, to go up to build the house of Jerusalem, which is in Jerusalem. To build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. And all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, with beasts, with precious things, besides all that was willingly offered. Also Cyrus the king brought forth vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. Even those did Cyrus king of Persia bring forth by the hand of Mithridates, the treasurer, and numbered them unto Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this is the number of them: 30 chargers of gold, 1,000 chargers of silver, 29 knives, 30 basins of gold, silver basins of second sort 410, and other vessels 1,000. All vessels of gold and silver were 5,400. And all these Sheshabar bring up with them of the captivity that were brought up from Babylon out of Jerusalem. So 11 fairly short verses there in chapter 1. A little bit of the background, I guess, of Ezra. Said that it was written somewhere, we believe, in the neighborhood of 456 BC to 444 BC, sometime in that neighborhood. And the author is actually unknown, but believed to be Ezra. These first few verses here, Cyrus makes this proclamation. He realizes that God's giving all this kingdom, and so he has been charged here by the Lord to build a house, the Lord's house in Jerusalem. And he asked for people to go and build, and ask also that those that maybe cannot go to send help in different ways. He asked them to send money, to send the beast, and to do different things to help out. So he's trying to rally all the troops together, all the people together, and get the house built for the Lord there in Jerusalem. And so going down through the remainder of the chapter there, 5 through 11, it talked about there that talked about in addition to what the people were asked to send, Cyrus here also sent a lot of money and a lot of assets there to help in the build. And those that he sent, it talked about were what Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem. So it's if I understood it correctly, it seems to be what Nebuchadnezzar had originally stolen from Jerusalem was now returned to by Cyrus. So, but anyway, that was what was it, 5,400 vessels of gold and silver there that were brought. So, seems to me that was quite a bit of money, and it would go a long way in helping them rebuild or build the temple there for the Lord. There was an odd detail there that jumped out at me, were the 9 and 20 knives. It seemed odd to mention. We've got vessels of gold and vessels of silver, and we're asking up here that people send gold and silver and beast and different things, but it's almost here like we've sent some silverware. We've sent a few knives, 29 knives. It just seemed odd to me that was mentioned. Well, the commentator made a note about it, and their note was very simple. Said, if God felt the need to let us know that there were 29 knives that showed up and were sent, that if he felt the need and thought that detail was so important, that small detail, then how much more important are we to him than these 29 knives that are mentioned? So I thought that was a good thought to bring out there. But so that's pretty much kind of the first chapter, at least what stuck out to me.
Was the wall rebuilt? What rebuilt at this time?
I don't think it was at this time, because some more of the background that I didn't write down there was that Ezra, I believe it's parts of Ezra and parts of Nehemiah. Let me see if I can find it here real quick. Ezra 2 and Nehemiah 7 are virtually the same, it says. And so if you take those two books and read those two books, they're virtually the same thing. So at this point in time, we've just read about the wall may not have been built yet. But I believe that it all kind of correlates together. It even talked about here that at one point in history, Ezra and Nehemiah were one book in the Hebrew Bible. But being separate books, as in modern Bibles, was no doubt even earlier, because Ezra 2 and Nehemiah 7 are virtually the same. Such a repetition would never occur in one book. And so, in the Hebrew Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah were one book. But they were separated in the canon when it was wrote down for us.
Brother Keith, down at the bottom of my Bible, not trying to jump ahead, but in chapter 2 it says, "This is a different Nehemiah from the one who rebuilt Jerusalem's walls 80 years later."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's later,
Lots
wasn't it?
Mhm. I believe we talked about over in Nehemiah there that it was thought that Ezra was with him in part of the time, or not the whole time, but part of the time, so they lived about the same time.
That's when this Ezra came to Jerusalem in 458, Nehemiah came in 445, which would be 87 years later.
Mm. This was something else that was in the commentary here. It talks about 280 verses in the book of Ezra. And said we have the following most unusual breakdown for a Bible book. 111 verses are considered registers. 109 are what they categorize as narrative. 44 are letters. 10 verses are prayer. 3 verses are proclamations. 3 verses are just excerpts. So for the 280 verses, that's how they kind of broke them down. And I guess you can kind of compare that to Paul's writings. Paul's books were letters. You know, I guess all his verses would be letters and the narrative, but that's how they broke them down. And they've given a date here, or a chronological order, I guess, of the book. It said in 538, the decree of Caesar, or the decree of Cyrus rather, was made to rebuild the temple. So that's 538. In 536, which I guess is 2 years later, right? The foundation was laid. Work was halted in 535. But the temple was completed in 516. So 22 years from the decree till it was completed. And of course we read Esther back before Nehemiah. Esther's crowned queen in 479. And so Nehemiah arrives in 444. But then Nehemiah's second journey, which we might, I guess that would have been what we read about last week in the last chapter of Nehemiah. That was in 420. So from 538 to 444 was the building of the temple to the completion of the wall at Jerusalem. So that's, what do we say, 83, 86? It'd be 96, wouldn't it? Is that right? 538 to 444? 538 to 444.
I have to ask Phyllis.
I just spell.
Yeah. All right. 538 minus 444. 94. So 94 years from Cyrus saying build it on the temple until the walls of Jerusalem, which Nehemiah rebuilt, were completed. But there's 15 years, it says here. 535, work was halted. 520, it was resumed. I like this quotation from George Rawlinson. I don't know who this is, but this is who wrote this. The book of Ezra is a work of so simple a character as scarcely to require an introduction. It is a plain, straightforward account of one of the most important events in Jewish history, the return of the people of God from the Babylonian captivity. Very little that is directly, I can't say that word. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Basically, very little that is written within it occurs in it. The writer tells his story plainly as he can and leaves his story to teach his own lesson. Didactic. D-I-D-A-C-T-I-C.
How do you spell that?
D-I-D-A-C-T-I-C.
I just looked that up the other day. I sure did, and I cannot remember what it
Mhm.
was. Yeah.
Well, I think of dictation as being, you know, you dictate something, write it down,
I don't,
talk it out.
I wrote it down somewhere. Somewhere in here.
Didactic.
I
I
sure
don't know if I have
did
enough
look it up.
signal for it or not.
As Johnny would say, somebody Google it.
Yeah.
Google it.
Intended for instruction, instructive, inclined to teach or lecture others too much, teaching or intending to teach a moral lesson. Intended for instruction. Didactic. Miss Phyllis, add that to the quiz next week, if you will.
Well, I was just looking over in chapter 2, and I had just seen the first page of chapter 2, and I thought, well, that's not too bad, let me see how I can spell them. And I turned it over and I, oh my goodness gracious, it's all the way down the page.
Yeah. Did you get down to verse 43 when they're all there?
Well, I'm down to 57.
Wow.
Oh, me.
Well, thankfully, the names only go to about 60, 61. So there's,
There's only 70 verses.
that's 8 verses, there's not even names in.
Yeah, but look how many's in one.
Yeah.
I guess I could go back through Nehemiah and see if all these are named in Nehemiah and just refer back to that.
I think these are different.
Mm.
A lot of them do look different, don't they?
Yes, they do.
They look like we're a different language.
Nebo, I've been there. Oh no, I've said that a lot, oh no.
Oh, no.
You have anything else you wanna bring out in this chapter?
Verse 6, everything's off the things, some of the things that were brought with that last part there, it says, beside all that was willingly offered.
Yeah,
You gotta be willing to
yeah,
be used, you gotta be willing to give,
yeah,
it's gotta be done willingly.
yeah. Anytime I run across something like that, I'm reminded of, and Papa's the one that mentioned it to me one time. I asked him about a verse there in the New Testament, or a story there about how that the Pharisee and the publican, and how the Pharisee stood, you know, well, I give tithes of all that I possess, and I've done this, and I've done that, I this, I that. And the publican, standing afar off, couldn't as much as lift up his head, the Bible said. He smote himself on the chest and said, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner, you know. And I mentioned that to him, and he said, yeah, he said the Pharisee had an eye problem. It wasn't that he had poor vision, it was just thought too much of himself.
Well, we have problems in America today.
All
So he fasted twice a week, which
right.
he didn't fast very long, did he?
No.
A true fast.
Yeah. Anything else?
I don't know how many of these things are in here, but there's only 50,000 return on reserve balance. in
Yeah.
Chapter 2, so.
Yeah. This must have been the fathers of all 50,000, I guess, wasn't it?
Even though it's written in the book of Ezra, it was actually quite a time before Ezra actually came back.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it Job that's credited with being the oldest book in the Bible?
I think that's what you find.
As far as written, I guess. Is that right? I think I've read that somewhere. You just think when you read it, you think, well, Genesis was written first, and then Exodus, and then Leviticus, but that's just how it was categorized and put together when it was given to us. When we could have it.
Yeah, we had to wait for Moses to get that.
Mm-hmm. Let's all stand together if you would. Be much in prayer for one another, much in prayer for not only our country, but the world as a whole.
Right.
Sad shape.
We'll pray for these riots that's going on, and people go, they say they're going peaceful, but I don't know about, and most of them don't end up peaceful, they break in and tear up stuff and burn stuff.
Yeah.
It's not very peaceful, I mean,
No.
a lot of people owning property that, getting damaged.
Yep. No use for that. Doesn't accomplish anything.
Even getting out, close to home.
Read an article.
With most of us in here were kids, you hear of a riot or somebody getting killed, up in Chicago, San Francisco,
Yeah.
hurry, and get right out the door.
Read an article yesterday where there were a whole bunch arrested in a big city on the East Coast, and of those that were arrested, the most of them were from the state of Washington. And when asked why they were here, they said they were paid to come to the East Coast and riot.
I said, ACLU was in
Further,
there.
further dividing the country, that's all they're trying to do.
It's all planned out,
Mm-hmm.
big time money.
Yep.
$20 million to, get people out of jail.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a day, $20 million.
Mm-hmm.
I'd read a post about Nashville. This man said him and his wife had went out to eat, and they saw all these buses, loads of people coming into Nashville there and getting off, and didn't think a whole lot about it at that time. Got home and saw the news where there was rioting and all going on downtown, and
Mm-hmm.
it clicked,
Mm-hmm.
to him, and like you said, they bust them in there for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
to get it started.
Then people wonder why the president makes comments like getting armed forces out on the streets.
Have to maintain order. Or whatever, I feel like whatever means necessary, you've got to maintain order.
It gets to the point where some, if they let it go, it's just you got to,
Mhm.
things to bring their own rock, bricks now.
Mhm.
No, they were shipped in.
Yeah, that's why I said they even bring their own.
Mhm.
They were shipped in on pallets and
Yeah.
put there for them to use.
Country's in a sad shape.
It is.